Hello, this is Zangad from Model Shark Studio. In this video, I'll show you how to get started using DestroyIt by taking one of Unity's free shantytown models and making it destructible. We'll start with an empty scene, and by the end we'll have a destructible refrigerator that sparks when hit, has visual damage stages, uses rigid body physics, and has a door that can be destroyed separately from the base refrigerator. Let's get started. At this point, I've created a new Unity project and imported the DestroyIt asset into it. I've created a new scene called Getting Started and added a terrain component, directional light, and skybox to it. So with that basic scene setup out of the way, we're ready to add a character controller. I'll be using the first-person controller included in the DestroyIt demo scene, so let's switch over to the demo scene and create a prefab of it so we can drop it into our new scene. We'll also need to create a prefab of the Game Manager object, since it includes several scripts that handle player input, destruction and debris management, and object pooling. Now that we have prefabs of those objects, we can switch back to our new scene and drop them in. Before we can use the first-person controller, there are a few weapon positions and particle effects that need to be assigned on the Input Manager script attached to the Game Manager object. These fields tell the Input Manager what position to start firing the weapons from, where exactly to play the particle effects such as the gun's muzzle flash, the rocket's launch smoke and flame, and the cannon's blast effects. And lastly, we need to delete the default main camera since we won't be needing it. With that bit of configuration out of the way, I think we're ready to do a weapons check. Here I'm just cycling through the weapons by pressing the Q key, firing each one to make sure they're working in our new scene as expected. When you run a new DestroyIt project for the first time, you may notice this warning in the console. DestroyIt uses a custom layer to put persistent debris in, and it's warning us that it can't find that layer. To fix this warning, we'll add a new user layer to our project named DestroyIt Debris. Now we'll no longer get the warning when we run the scene. Now our new scene is set up and we're ready to create our first destructible object. For this tutorial, we're going to use the Shantytown Refrigerator, a free asset by Unity Technologies. After importing it into our project, we'll drag the model into the scene and take a look at it. So we see here it has a parent game object with two meshes under it, one for the refrigerator and one for the door. We can see that the meshes already have mesh colliders on them, but I'm going to remove the mesh colliders and instead add box colliders to both the refrigerator base and door. Not only are box colliders better for performance, but it will also allow us to make a tight-fitting door that swings on hinges later. Colliders are simple to add but can take time to position correctly, so I'm going to do this off-screen. A few minutes later, we have nice box colliders around our refrigerator base and door. Since a refrigerator is mostly made of metal, let's tag these colliders as metal with the tagit script. We drag the tagit script onto each game object that has a collider and choose metal from the drop-down. Doing this tells the DestroyIt weapons to play a metal spark particle effect whenever a collision occurs. Now when we run the scene, we get the particle collision effect when the model is hit with the gun or cannonball. Now let's make the object destructible. Now at this point, I could just drag the destructible script onto the refrigerator's top-level game object, and that would work, but as you can see here, the effect is a little simplistic. If I destroy the door, the entire object is destroyed, which may be fine for some games. But since our refrigerator has two separate meshes, I think it would be nice if they could both be destroyed individually. To do this, we'll remove the destructible script from the parent object, and instead put it on both the refrigerator and the door. Now when we run the scene and do enough damage to either destructible object, they'll be destroyed independently. You'll notice our destruction at this point is the simple default particle effect. This effect is really more of a placeholder so you can get your destructible objects set up and configured quickly, and then improve them later with cool custom particle effects or destroyed prefabs as needed. So we have our simple destruction working now, but you'll notice that our refrigerator doesn't have any visible damage stages. It looks as though it's undamaged right up until it's destroyed. We can make this look better by changing the refrigerator's material to use a DestroyIt progressive damage shader. If we look at the material on our model, we see that it's using the bump diffuse shader. Let's change it to use the DestroyIt bump diffuse shader. Notice how this shader has a few more options. The damage texture is the pattern that will represent progressive damage as it spreads across the model. The damage bump map is the normal map that will give the damage texture depth. The damage mask is a texture with 4 separate color channels that tells the shader how the damage will spread and increase with each damage level. The damage level at the bottom controls what damage stage the material is currently on. You can quickly check how your material will look at each damage level by sliding this value up and down. Here we can see that our texture is a bit large on the model, so I'll increase the tiling to 5 for both the damage texture and the normal map. That looks better. Be sure to set the current damage level back to 0 before moving on, or your models will appear to start with that level of damage. The last thing we need to do to get progressive damage working is drag the material to the Material Preload folder under Resources. This will create instances of the material at each damage level and preload them for us at runtime so we get smooth material swapping at each damage stage. When we run the scene again, notice how our refrigerator shows progressively more dents and scratches until it's finally destroyed. Now let's add some physics to our refrigerator. I'm going to put a rigid body on both the refrigerator and the door. I'll set the mass of the refrigerator to 8 since it would probably be pretty heavy, and I'll leave the door's mass at 1. Now when I run the scene, notice how the door just falls off. To get the effect I want, I'm going to need to join the door to the refrigerator with hinge joints. I've decided to put 2 hinges on the door, right where the mesh hinges are located. If you're following along, pause the video here to get my hinge settings and apply them to your model. I've also captured these settings in an image that can be found in the video description. The end result is we now have a destructible refrigerator with realistic hinge physics, where both the door and refrigerator base can be destroyed independently. It can be damaged by bullets, collisions, falling damage, and explosives, and it exhibits visible progressive damage and impact particle effects where inappropriate. I hope this video has been helpful in introducing you to some of the basics of DestroyIt. There are many more features that we'll cover in upcoming intermediate and advanced tutorials. In the next video, we'll start where we left off and improve our destructible refrigerator with destroyed prefabs, custom particle effects, damage effects, and much more.